What was the first puzzle you ever set? How did you get started?
Found CTC basically by accident. I was only looking for a YouTube video on some Sudoku techniques, and so I got to CTC. I watched the video and I found it intriguing and watched a bit more until eventually I found one video where they said, this is a puzzle which was sent to us by a viewer. And then I thought, this sounds interesting. Maybe I will do one too. And I decided to do it, but not send it to them directly, but publish it on Logic Masters Germany first. I did that and got quite good feedback. And I thought, yeah, maybe this is not the best. Maybe I do a couple more before I send one to them. Christoph Seeliger recommended it to them. And then it was suddenly at a certain point that I opened CTC and to see what video they produced that day. And then it was my puzzle. So that was very surprising and made me extremely happy.
How long did it take for you to set that puzzle? Was it surprisingly easy to set the puzzle, or did it take a lot longer than you thought it would?
The first one took, I would say, a night. After that, I found an error and corrected it, and then it was finished. So, usual stuff.
Did you set it as you would normally set something now, or was it a different process because you were just starting out?
It was entirely different because back then I basically set it with pen and paper, where today I would rather use F-puzzles or Sudoku Lab to complement the construction procedure.
Had you solved any variant Sudoku before you stumbled on CTC?
I was looking for a standard Sudoku technique, and the only variant Sudoku I solved before was killer Sudoku.
Is that why you decided to set the killer Sudoku?
Probably, yes, but it was also that back then there were lots of killer Sudokus showcased on CTC, and it was only natural to choose killer Sudoku as the first variant to publish.
Describe in a few words, what is your setting process now?
First, I try to look for an idea. I just play around a bit, usually on F puzzles, until I find an idea, and then I try to build the puzzle around that idea. After that, there is the usual setting process. So after the break-in, I try to find cool next steps to follow up. In the end, there is a quite tedious process of finding a good ending, which is doable, but still cool and has a unique solution.
When you're looking for a cool ending, are you trying to maximize the aesthetic of your opening or preserve it?
It depends a little bit. So usually I try to preserve the logic that was there in the beginning, but in case that I find something else that I find quite interesting, some cool bits of logic, I will try to use this for an ending.
When you find something at the end, well, this is way cooler than what I was going to do before. I'll just restart the puzzle and do this.
Yeah.
You mentioned CTC and how that got you started. What's your sort of relationship with CTC? Do you watch all of their content? Do you regularly email with Simon?
Okay, interesting question. I do regularly watch CTC, but not every video. I am in contact with Simon from time to time, so not very often. On average, once a month.
Do you just talk about puzzles or discussing your favorite TV shows and golf?
It's mainly about puzzles.
Yeah. I'm always curious when Simon says, I have a pseudo relationship with Phistomefel. We email sometimes. What consists of this relationship? Jovial's question, which you mentioned you find quite interesting about Cracking the Cryptic and how they put a lot of attention on your puzzles. And she says, I imagine it likely creates a lot of pressure to be consistent, putting out fantastic puzzles. How do you maintain a healthy attitude about setting from a mental health standpoint?
It sounds so normal, so basic from the argument, but I only publish puzzles I feel comfortable publishing. I try to have fun constructing it, and that keeps pressure a bit off, so I don't feel pressure to publish a puzzle every 2 weeks. It was also that at one time I had no idea how to construct a new puzzle because I had the feeling that I ran out of ideas that were good. I decided to take a break from making puzzles for a while. When you notice that you're having not a very good time, that you just go ahead and take a break.
Even on the small scale, just taking a break when you're setting is very important. Or when you're doing anything, really. Breaks are important.
Yeah.
So do you have a lot of puzzles in backlog that you aren't happy with or aren't comfortable publishing?
I do have a few. I have kind of a kind of a garbage dump of ideas, a folder of some puzzles that I created where I think, yeah, there is an idea in there that I like, but all in all, how it's made is just not good. Sometimes I get back to my idea garbage dump, just pick one and work on it and find out that there is actually a cool twist that makes it interesting.
Puzzle recycling bin more than a garbage dump.
Yes.
I know that a lot of people seemed quite surprised by your appearance here. You have a bit of a reputation of being more, I don't know, reclusive or mysterious than other setters, and there are a few other setters who have this mysterious nature to them. Is that perception ignorant of your interaction with people on LMD, or did something change recently that made you want to interact with the community more?
Not necessarily. It is that something changed it. This goes in the direction of why I'm, for instance, not on the Discord server. The point is, I just was afraid that when I joined Discord that I will basically dive into there and not do anything else. And I was afraid of that because I know that this is dangerous for me because I have an inclination in that direction. So that's why I haven't joined Discord.
That's definitely a reason I have never heard anyone say, well, Phistomefel probably hasn't joined the Discord because he didn't want to become obsessed with puzzles. Like, I've never heard that. So I'm glad that you set the record straight. Most people actually do say that you probably don't join the Discord because you get so many people asking you to solve their puzzles or asking you about your puzzles or stuff like that. What do you think about that argumentation?
That's also part of it, sure. Yes, this is definitely true because I also know for myself that I'm a person that has a hard time saying no to a request. This would fill my schedule, basically.
How would you describe your reputation as a constructor?
Two mysteries I think are solved right now. So the first was whether I am Simon himself or Mark. So none of those two. I'm very sorry for that. Apart from that, I never actually thought much about what kind of reputation I have. Probably what Simon suggested in his videos, that I am some kind of genius, which I definitely feel I'm not.
The other part of your reputation is definitely that you make harder puzzles.
The reputation of making harder puzzles, well, it's hard to argue with that. I could say that I have a 1-star puzzle on Logic Master's journey. Oh, yeah. And I think I have 2 or 3 2-star puzzles and a few 3-star puzzles, but yes, the majority is 4 and 5 stars. So when I play around with ideas for puzzles, well, often they turn out to be quite difficult. And I really love building these intricate solving paths, and this leads to quite naturally a hard puzzle. So this is definitely right.
Simon often says, and I think a lot of other people who have interacted with you say that you're a very humble person, and I don't even have to go into that because it's clear from you saying that you're not a genius that you're a very humble person. So
okay, I have the feeling when I say yes, I am a very humble person. This doesn't sound right.
I am incredibly humble. What are your favorite kinds of puzzles to solve?
The kinds of puzzles I like to solve, they have very nice interactions between the clues. There is a basic idea behind that puzzle that the puzzle revolves around. One example would be a puzzle that I haven't solved because I watched the CTC video before I did that, is from Mitchell Lee, the famous Thermo Sudoku with set break-in. There you have this idea that first of all you have to see this set entry, then see how, okay, I don't want to spoil.
People will skip this part of the video if they really want to. It's a really old puzzle, so don't feel.
Okay, good. Then you were warned. If you are about to do this puzzle, then please skip the next 2 minutes. There was this idea that you have to take a look at how these thermos are aligned and then figure out a min-max strategy that you have to apply in order to make things right. And this creates so much tension that you can solve the rest of the puzzle from it with just a few given digits. And this is the kind of puzzle that I find really cool. It almost feels like you create a new puzzle type within a known variant.
I really like that you bring up that puzzle because it doesn't solve the puzzle, but it almost creates a new puzzle within the puzzle after you find that deduction. And I think that's a beautiful example of what you're saying. You just mentioned sets, so I'll jump to the set. So you were sort of the discoverer of the Phistomefel Ring. What's the story behind that? How did you end up finding that?
Back then I did a lot of killer Sudokus, and there I was trying to figure out some new cool stuff on how to set a difficult killer Sudoku, and I ended up finding this particular configuration by just playing around on F puzzles. This is also something I would like to point to, I know this is called a Phistomefel theorem or Phistomefel ring. Back then, I didn't know whether the discovery was new or not, so I wrote it on the Logic Masters forum to see whether anyone knows something like that. Then it was basically pretty soon proposed that I discovered something entirely new, when only later on I learned that something like this has been known for a long time. So I think it was a special case of something which is called an SK loop, which is a classical Sudoku technique.
It was completely new to you and completely new to most people who hadn't seen that SK loop. I don't know if the SK loop has the same understandability to it, the way you represent the stuff, but usually classic techniques don't have that elegance to them.
I see what you mean, yeah.
So don't be too humble. Of course, it wasn't just you who developed the basis of set. I even saw some posts in that LMD forum thread where some person named Fred had discussed like a bunch of other relationships and how to generalize this idea. And it was really interesting to read, actually. What are your thoughts on how set equivalence theory is used today?
So to go a bit back, I think the puzzle of Mitchell Lee, for instance, directly used this idea that Fred proposed there. I think it was even the very set theory idea that he proposed there.
Extreme case, I think he said.
What do I think? Set was extremely popular for a certain amount of time and is still used often today. So for myself, I have the feeling that I did quite a few puzzles that use set. And then at a certain point, I had the feeling that just for myself, I don't want to incline that it should apply to everyone. Just for myself, I had the feeling that I don't want to do set break-ins anymore. So I try to find something new.
I think a lot of people would echo that feeling as well. So you're not in the minority in terms of set. Now, one thing about set is that the newer set puzzles I find are very difficult to telegraph. How important is telegraphing to your setting process?
I think it is very important. So what I usually love doing is when I set variant Sudoku and I have an idea that I want to telegraph to the people. As I said, I like it when the puzzle revolves around this one idea. So I try to, when I find an interesting structure, that I try to put it into the grid as often as I can. And when people see that something is there at least twice or even 4 times or more often, then they think, there might be something to it. And I actually like this idea of being, I don't know whether fair is the correct term, but I will use it, is fair to the solver to say, hey, look, here is something interesting, try to figure it out. Because what I am not very good at is scanning. So when I first have to find, okay, this is there and there I have to figure this out, this can take a lot longer.
Are you more inclined to break-ins or ideas where not just you experimenting, but the solver also sort of has to experiment with the constraint to figure out how it interacts with what's going on, and then you reward that with using that knowledge more than once? Is that a fair description?
I would say yes, and definitely even more so when I set hybrid puzzles. There it is even very unclear in the beginning of how things interact, how the rules interact. I think it's very important to do this to motivate the solver to go and look for some interferences that are interesting.
Hybrid Sudoku, which is sort of Sudoku plus some kind of pencil puzzle. You've also set lots of pencil puzzles and hybrid pencil puzzles in terms of one pencil puzzle plus another pencil puzzle. Is there a difference in the way you set a pencil puzzle versus a Sudoku?
Let me think about it. That's a good question. I definitely solve a few more pencil puzzles of that type before I go set it to familiarize myself with the rule set and all the implications and standard techniques that you use. What I really love doing, no matter whether it's hybrid Sudoku or to pencil puzzles that I put together, first of all, I always set an example puzzle. So I go on a smaller grid and try to figure out how these rules interact. And I use this as kind of a playground. And in the end, I get an example puzzle that I can show to people to showcase how this works. So this is a win-win situation for me and myself.
I mean, it's a win-win situation for you and the solvers because they get to experience, you get experience. I really adore one specific pencil puzzle that I think you created. It's the one with the boulders, the rolling boulders.
Sisyphus.
Yes, that one. I love that one.
It works a bit like Skyscraper. And then there was, unfortunately, I don't recall the sector. I think it was called Exum Snake, where you had exums which could suddenly take a turn. I took that idea, combined it with skyscrapers. So that's, I think, how I created Sisyphus.
That is very interesting. Do you usually find new ideas by playing around with other puzzles, or do you have shower thoughts about puzzles like, oh, what if we had like a boulder rolling and then it was stopped by turns? Like, do you just come up with those, or do you find most of your ideas from solving other people's puzzles?
Sometimes like this, sometimes like that. So it's often that I see an idea and think this is amazing, and then think, could this also work, for instance, for a different type of variant? And that's, for instance, how I was inspired by a Thermo Sudoku, which had a very cool idea to create an arrow Sudoku, where I found out that it also works for that. So this was my displacement arrow Sudoku. But on the other hand, I also did is, for instance, I put up a list of pencil puzzles of different genres like region division, shading. Then I also had a list of puzzles that create regions and a list of puzzles that use regions. And then I tried to figure out which combination is interesting. And that's, for instance, how Philomeno Aquarium was created. There I just saw, okay, aquarium puzzles need regions and Philomeno creates regions. So let's see what happens then.
That's fascinating. Before we get off of pencil puzzles, Zetamat asked, what is your favorite pencil puzzle genre?
In general, I would say region division type puzzles. And as a concrete example, I would use Philomeno. There are a lot of people who create incredible Philomeno variants like Jasper and Magnus Josephson, for instance, and many, many others.
Speaking of region division, you sort of created the first chaos construction. Talk about how that came to be.
I remember I had this idea that I wanted to play around with something fundamental in Sudoku, and the easiest thing to play around with was the regions. I decided to play around with that and how my first chaos construction, how the rules work. That I remember I had this idea when I went for grocery shopping. So there I had this idea of my first chaos construction, how the rules should work. I came back to this idea quite often, and I have to say I'm very happy that other setters also decided to go in that direction, to set also a lot of chaos constructions. That made me very happy.
Did you think when you first thought of it, like, oh wow, this has so much potential, like this is going to be huge? Did you think that when you first thought of it, or were you like, oh, that would just be an interesting like one-off thing?
This was definitely, this is interesting to do this once, and then I just happened to have a few other ideas how to do chaos construction, so to other rules to create these regions, and so I came back to this ever more often.
What do you think about the current climate of chaos construction? Do you solve many of these puzzles that are coming out? I mean, there's way too many to solve.
Yes, that's also a bit my problem. There are way too many to solve them, and the problem with chaos constructions is that they usually tend to be very difficult and as such time-consuming.
Speaking of these overwhelming number of puzzles being posted on LMD, and there being just such an avalanche of puzzles all the time, as sort of someone who very much interacts with the LMD side of the community, how do you remember the sort of transition from pure sort of forum state where everyone on the page was from the forums and posting on LMD to the what is it now where there's just random people who are from not just Germany but all over the world just posting on Logic Masters Germany? A lot of people say that CTC invaded Logic Masters Germany and is now like overpopulating it essentially. What's your perception of that?
I do recall that there, of course, were a lot of discussions about this. It very much interfered with the habits of people. The guys from Logic Masters Germany, they were basically used to, I don't know, the setting speed of or publishing speed of once a week or so. A puzzle was published. Everyone was basically eager to amass as many solutions as possible. When a new puzzle comes out, they immediately jumped at it, tried to solve it. And that's absolutely impossible. With many more people coming, the kinds of interactions were different. And so I had the impression that there were quite a few who felt that the site is not anymore what it used to be and didn't feel so comfortable with that. But it is only something I can describe what I perceived how others told this. So I, for myself, I don't know, this transition, it just happened. I don't have a particular opinion on that. that.
So I don't know all the intricacies of differences between the LMD community and the CTC community. In the CTC Discord community, we often send puzzles into the public testing forum where people can test them before they're released. Do you guys have anything similar like that? Or is it more private testing or personal testing?
It is on a personal basis. So it happens from time to time that someone asks on the forum, hey, I have a cool new puzzle, could somebody test it? Then usually someone comes around and tests it. But it's not like on Discord. Mm-hmm. So there is a huge difference. So it is a bit problematic to find someone who tests your puzzles.
So it must be much more difficult to start getting going on LMD because you don't know people who can test your puzzles. Was that a difficult struggle when you were starting?
When I was starting, I had no testers. I just did the testing myself, and this worked out fine most of the time. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I got the feedback, so, hey, I have more than one solution. And I was, oh my God, what did I do? Or no solution at all. I remember that in 2 cases, I just added a certain rule to make the puzzle unique because I overlooked a possibility.
So when you were developing from that beginning stage to what you are now or what you became, did you have any sort of like puzzle mentor, like someone who was an experienced setter that you figure out how you should be going about these things or would test your puzzles for you or whatever?
No, actually I didn't have a mentor. When I was curious, I just asked a few people. For instance, I remember that I asked Richard Stoke when I solved one of his puzzles how he set it, whether there was a particular trick on how to set this. So I remember it was basically a Sudoku with 2 irregular grids overlaid on each other, and it had a very small amount of given digits and it solved really, really nicely. And I asked him how he managed to do this. And I really hoped that he would tell me that there was a certain trick to it, but he said a lot of trial and error. And this was exactly what I did not want to hear at that stage.
Have you done any collaboration setting?
No, I haven't. So what comes closest is I do have a tester, and when they get me feedback, I sometimes have the feeling that they have a huge contribution to my puzzles, but not a direct collaboration.
Is that something that you would want to do in the future, or you just feel like you aren't someone who would collaborate?
I think it would be a very interesting experience to try this out. Yeah, definitely.
And we mentioned Richard Stock. Richard, he sort of feels like a figure that has been creating puzzles for as long as time itself.
I know the feeling, yeah.
I think a lot of people feel as though you also have been creating puzzles for forever, basically, because it's that when they came into the CTC community, you were already very well established. Like you got very well established very early. So it seems like you've been creating puzzles forever. But it was like there, and then all of a sudden, like the graph of popularity of Phistomefel was nothing, and then all of a sudden 100%. What do you think sort of skyrocketed you to this like position of being like a super well-known setter early on in your career? Is it just the fact that Simon adores your puzzles, or do you not feel like you were skyrocketed?
Yeah, I think it's mainly that somehow the puzzles that I set seem to appeal very much to Simon, and that is the reason why my puzzles are so popular.
Which of your puzzles do you feel like was most important for you as a setter to develop?
There is one particular Sudoku that I was very proud of when I built it, and I took many ideas of it. So this was my first Galaxy Killer Sudoku. It was the first time that I built a hybrid puzzle, but there was more to this. So this basically set for me the scene that, okay, it's possible to combine pencil puzzles with Sudokus, and I found that I enjoy this quite a lot. On the other hand, there were also a few tricks in there that I discovered that helped me build other puzzles. For instance, there is this 36 cage, and this turns out in an N shape or a Z shape. So I found this by accident, but it was very interesting. And this was the starting point for my Killer X Sudokus, where all of the killer cages that I had exactly the same form. I often had this feeling that when I don't know what to do next, I will just go back to this particular puzzle and try to find something, some logic that I built in there that I can exploit.
So is there some reason why that 36 was so important, I guess? If you haven't solved this puzzle, just skip ahead.
What you get for free from this is basically a 9-cell region where all cells have to be different. This 38 cage, the two upper cells from the 31 cage, they cannot share a digit with the 38 cage, virtual 9 cage.
How long does it usually take you from the start of a concept to a finished puzzle?
This is usually quite some time. I think there was one Sudoku that I said very fast. It was anti-knight arrow Sudoku, where I basically knew from the start what I wanted, and it worked out very nicely. This was a puzzle that I set within 2 hours, and this was way faster than anything else I have created. Usually it takes quite long because I test the ending of a puzzle a lot. So usually I try to figure out what is the best possible ending that I can find that is still challenging, but not overly so, and you don't have to do some crazy scanning. So I do that nowadays. This was different once. Yeah, this often takes a lot of time to figure out the different possibilities, how I can end a puzzle. And sometimes I end up redoing the puzzle because I'm not happy with any of the results. So this is the really frustrating part of it, when you have this starting idea and in the mid-solve you have some cool ideas, but it doesn't work out in the end.
Do you have any puzzles that you did end up publishing that you sort of wish you didn't, wish you could redo them or take them back? Like maybe the starting idea was really great and then you couldn't end it how you wanted to, but you just published it anyway. Is there any puzzling regret that you have?
Yes, there are. As I said before, there are 2 puzzles, for instance, that I published too early, basically, where I had to invent new rules. So where I had to introduce new rules to make the solution unique. So this is, for instance, something, but also, as I said, now I try to make the scanning not so hard. But there was a time when I thought, oh, in the ending, it would be really nice to have a Y-wing or 2. And there was, I think, one particular Sudoku. It was with arrows and so some odd even cells, and I also had anti-knight, and there I had a break-in which I was quite proud of, but the rest was just brutal scanning, and in the end there were, I think, 2 Y-wings which also involved the anti-knight constraint, which is absolutely horrible to find.
It's awful.
This is something that I really wished I did different.
It makes my entire body like cringe when you say, oh, I wanted to put 2 Y-wings in the end of the puzzle. No, don't do that. What do you do when you're not puzzling?
I like to play board games, for instance. This is something that I like. I go hiking quite a lot, and I also play chess.
What's your favorite type of food?
Is yummy food a valid answer? I would say I really enjoy Chinese food. Make a puzzle with chess, so something like an anti-knight Sudoku.
That's anti-chess. Do you like the devil drawing that CTC uses for your puzzles?
I actually do, for a couple of reasons. So first of all, I do remember how, so this was not the first drawing that they used for the devil. There were 2 other versions before that. One was a bent over devil, which looked very medieval-like, was a small chubby, yeah, that one. And there I have to say, in comparison, the other ones are. So the new one is fantastic. On the other hand, it is also that this other drawing reminds me a bit of good old Diablo, and I spent a considerable amount of my youth playing Diablo 2. So
where does the name Phistomefel come from?
This actually comes from one of my favorite books. It is a book, fantasy novel by Thermo, a German fantasy author, and it's called The City of Dreaming Books. And there, the main antagonist is called Phistomefel, obviously inspired by Mephistopheles, but he is not some kind of demon or devil, but it is a shark maggot. It's a, yes, exactly. That was also the first thing that I thought when I read this, shark maggot. Interesting. Yeah, it's that kind of fantasy, but I really like that book, and I like this character despite being the antagonist. I named myself after that figure.
Who inspires you to make puzzles?
Are the puzzles partially actually. So that definitely, when I see a cool puzzle, this often inspires me to create a puzzle. When I think, oh, this logic is cool, I want to implement that as well, or change it a little bit and implement it. Other than that, I would say Eric Fox for creating F puzzles, which helps me a lot with creating puzzles, but not only creating, it's also a very cool playground. So, for instance, anti-night, most of my anti-night killer Sudokus there, I went ahead and pressed highlight cells seen by selection, and then you select a couple of cells and see which other cells are seen by that selection. That helped me in basically all of my anti-night puzzles to figure some stuff out.
Did you receive any piece of setting advice early on that really helped you sort of develop as a setter, or something that you would pass on to other new setters as advice?
When you set a puzzle, try to not only build a puzzle that you think yourself is fun to solve and that you're proud of the creation process, but also try to make the creation process fun, at least in parts. This can really help you to go on also through difficult phases, or when there is a point where you think, oh my god, I will never finish this puzzle. I also had this. Try to find something to also make the creation process fun if it's not already fun.
Speaking of making the setting process fun and not frustrating, you tend to be a setter that uses a lot of global constraints. These are constraints that many setters tend to avoid, as they are known for being really frustrating to work with, as often puzzles break for seemingly random reasons. In addition, they tend to lend themselves to creating puzzles in which the setter does not have much direct control over the solution path, further making them frustrating from a setting point of view. What draws you to them?
All that Jovial stated here is true. I can definitely agree with that. It can be extremely frustrating. What draws me to this is the interaction between these global constraints. So, for instance, something where I just tried it out and it worked just fine was when I used German whispers together with anti-XV constraint. I didn't know in the start what to expect. So for these types of Sudokus with global constraints, it's for me very important to use Sudoku Lab because it's a very powerful brute force solver that I can figure out quite early whether something has a solution or not. Because this is, for instance, what drove me mad when I tried to set a non-consecutive arrow Sudoku. And then in the end, even though I used F puzzles, it just didn't work out. A favorite type of constraint? Well, lately I've been doing a lot of anti-XV Sudokus, but I think my heart still goes with the anti-night constraint because I really like those geometric possibilities that you have with the anti-night constraint.
What reaction or quote from someone solving a puzzle you created has given you the most satisfaction?
When you see someone who reacts and you see his face and you hear him, this creates a lot stronger emotion and therefore satisfaction than when you read a comment. I would say this is definitely some of the comments that Simon had for my puzzles. So I think I would go for the Philomeno Aquarium.
Do you think it's very valuable to see other people solving your puzzle? I mean, you've mostly seen Simon solving your puzzle, but do you think there's value in seeing other people work through it?
Definitely. I mean, I learn a lot from that on how to maybe better telegraph ideas and see which kind of steps are hard to spot.
I recall Simon announcing a couple months ago that you had agreed to make a setting video for CTC as soon as you would have time for it. Are you still planning to do so?
Well, you see, I tend to be a bit perfectionist, so I actually started doing a Satyrs video, and then I noticed that I've been talking for over an hour without giving any valuable advice, so I put it away again and then tried it once more, and it again didn't work out. So I would say when I feel comfortable with what I produced, I will publish a Satyrs video, but I wouldn't wait for it.
Maybe send it to someone else and ask them what they think about the advice, because often when I watch back my own video, I'm like, what are you talking about, you idiot? Like, stop talking. It's hard for me to edit my own stuff because I could just cut, and then it's just, there's no video left. It's just all gone. So I definitely get what you're saying.
For me, this is painful.
Yeah.
Watch myself.
William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk on Star Trek, said that he's never watched an episode of the original series of Star Trek. He doesn't want to see himself acting. And I mean, it's fair. He does sort of make some very beginner mistakes in acting. So I understand why he doesn't want to watch. So it's not just you, it's everyone who critiques themselves too much. Are there any specific setters that you will go to solve from when you're looking for inspiration?
Mitchell Lee, I always loved his puzzles and drew some inspiration from them. Ahaupt as well. Jasper, for instance, has a lot of cool ideas. And of course, Sator Math is always good for finding a new type of constraint, be it doubler or something else.
Are there any specific puzzles you've solved which have had like a big impact on how you view setting and puzzles? Is there something that gave you like a shift of perspective?
So
Okay.
there's one which is my favorite puzzle of all time called Halle Grundreise by 2Ace. I think he is from Logic Masters Germany itself, so he didn't come from CTC. This is a puzzle where I knew from the start that was very difficult because I read from some experienced solver that this puzzle was a trusted companion for 2 months. And so I pride myself on solving it within 2 weeks. The rule set, although it is complicated, it allows for such beautiful interactions between all of the rules, and it feels like even the rules were masterfully designed. And the puzzle itself is, as I said, extremely complicated. But when I finally solved it, I went through it again and saw, okay, there is a fair path through it. But what I took from that is to see how the rules that I propose interact with each other. So that's what I took from this particular puzzle. To all the streamers out there, please do not solve this on your stream, because I specifically asked the author whether he was interested in CTC solving this puzzle, because then I would have recommended it because I liked it so much, but he said that he didn't feel comfortable with the solution being out there, be seen somewhere.
Simon has often commented that your puzzles are the best version or the puzzle of that variant. With that in mind, are there any of your past puzzles that you feel like didn't live up to the best version of that variant?
Definitely. As I said before, there are some puzzles that I would definitely redo. For instance, 2 that were live solved. One is a killer sandwich Sudoku, where the rules themselves are very complicated and where I added a certain extra rule to make the solution unique. So this is something that I would definitely change. The other puzzle, this anti-knight arrow Sudoku with odd evens in there, even knight sphere arrows. So that I would definitely redo.
Do you sometimes wish that you were just another setter, so you could just make puzzles in peace and not have these high expectations of you?
I wouldn't say that I wished I was a, how you said, so some not so recognized author, because as you said before, there are, I think you called it an avalanche of Sudokus on Logic Masters Germany, and there are really a lot of puzzles published that don't even get, for instance, the 10 solves that are necessary to get a rating. This can be very disheartening. I know that I am in a very privileged position in that way, because even if I post a puzzle that is incredibly difficult or niche, then it will probably get a rating, but others do not have this.
Because you have a loyal solving base, does that make it hard to take a break from Sudoku?
At the beginning, yes, but I felt a lot better when I took the break. It soon outweighed the disadvantages and this feeling compelled to publish something.
What motivates you to set new puzzles?
What I love doing is to just play around. For instance, when I played around with anti-knight constraints and then I came up with these puzzle reflections, what motivates me is playing around and then finding an idea that looks promising. Then I see, oh, this has potential, and I feel it in my fingers. I really have to go and make a puzzle out of this because I like it so much, this idea. In the end, when I like the solving path that at least I have in mind, which I realized is rarely the one that most people will take.
How do you know when the puzzle is good enough? Is there some criteria?
It's mainly the feeling, but I also had this that I had one version and then I thought, nah, it is okay, but I can do a lot better. And then some 2 weeks later, I found out, no, I cannot do better than this, or I would have to redo the complete puzzle. Then it is rather like lowering your expectation and settling for what is already there.
What strikes Kodak about your puzzles is how consistent they are in terms of quality during every phase of the solve. Do you think you can explain how you achieve this effect?
I try to stick to a certain theme, I explore the possibilities a lot. So I see, okay, after the break-in, I have this and that given. Then what can I add to make things interesting? And the thing is that I explore even then the possibilities quite a lot to see which works out best. And then when I have the feeling that, yeah, this is the right thing, then I just go along with it and then go up to the next step. It is very vague, but it is important to develop a feeling for what feels right in terms of the solving path.
When you're trying to find the perfect path through all these options that you have, do you find that you make a lot of versions of the same puzzle, or is it like through each sort of option you pick one, then you move on to the next one, or do you sort of do more than one step at a time?
Usually towards the end, I do a lot of different options, but everything starts from the same break-in. And if that doesn't work out, then I try to change, for instance, the location of the break-in to somewhere else if that's possible, or change some clues if that's possible. Then figure out whether things will work out then or not.
Since you began setting, how would you characterize how the puzzling community has evolved and how the puzzles themselves have evolved? I know that's a big question.
There are now a lot of other YouTube channels also involved with Sudokus, like your channel, or Sadamath, or Bramster, or Ranks. I really, really like this idea because it also makes more people interested in puzzles. And yeah, since I like puzzles, I think this is a good thing. How did puzzles change? I think there are a lot more variants than there used to be. The style has changed a bit over time. The solving paths are in parts very, very narrow. I'm not that sure. There were puzzles like that before CTC as well.
Is a narrow solve path the ideal situation for you, or are you happy with like multiple paths?
I have the impression that it is almost impossible to prevent people from taking other paths that you haven't seen. I remember that Ahaupt, so a lot of his setting time was mainly about making sure that people have to use a certain path. I think it was for his killer Sudoku, where Simon was pranked by Mark, who said that, yeah, this is quite an approachable Sudoku, which it wasn't. He said most of the time went into making sure that people can't find any other way around. But for me, especially when I use some global constraints, it is so easy to miss something that could be seen as bifurcation, could not be seen as bifurcation. There are so many possibilities, and it is virtually impossible. And then there's also the problem that when I set a puzzle and I have my solution path in mind and resolve it, I tend to stick to that path and not see anything else.
Right.
So yeah, that makes it even harder to find something else. That's why it's very, very good to get a tester who helps you with that, has a fresh pair of eyes.
Wolfers points out that he thinks there's a difference between preventing other paths from working versus trying to encourage solvers to find a specific path via telegraphing.
Telegraphing the break-in is, for instance, easy because there's not much else around in the puzzle, and you can say, okay, look at this. Here I have this situation, point some arrows to there, something, whatever you like, put it in the top left corner. People tend to see that quite easily. But the later you get into the solve, the harder it gets to telegraph ideas. There are some puzzles where I thought, oh, I have such a cool logic there, which is late in the puzzle, and it turned out that probably almost no one found it, not even Simon. It is good to telegraph these ideas, but it gets more difficult later in solve.
Do you think putting more clues in the grid helps with that, or is that causing more issues?
So I try to set minimalistic puzzles. So I would say if there is nothing else there that you can take a look at, then it's easier to find the solving path that you have in mind because, well, there's nothing else that could possibly make progress.
Would you say that if there was a clue which was redundant, you didn't necessarily need it for a puzzle to be unique, and you didn't necessarily need it for the solve path, but it maybe made the solve path cleaner via a certain path? Would you remove that or keep that, or what would your opinion be on adding something like that?
There, I would say it depends on how difficult the logic step is when you remove that particular clue. If I have the feeling that it is too hard without, then I put the clue And I think this is something where I have also changed my opinion over time, because earlier I would definitely have said, yeah, well, you can see this somehow, so it's valid. Yeah, this is also a valid point of view, but now I would do things a little bit different.
Yeah, I know you said you had a private tester that tests most of your puzzles. How does the back and forth work? Do you often change puzzles when they come back from testing, or do you usually just send a puzzle to a person to test? They say, this is good, and then you publish it, which is the more common of the two? Or is it sort of a mix?
I think it is around 50-50.
Okay.
So there were some puzzles where it went back and forth quite often, because I would always mess up the ending. This was, for instance, my Kilomino Sudoku. There I would always mess up the ending. I always overlooked some ambiguity in how the phenomenal cages could grow. And I think it went back and forth like 4 or 5 times until it finally worked out.
Is there any puzzle that you sort of sent to your tester and then it came back and like you couldn't rework it?
Oh, I think it was once. And that was a puzzle where, yeah, it was honest feedback. My tester didn't say that directly, but it was logic that was seen very often, and it was just not that interesting. Yeah, my tester didn't say it like that, but I felt like that. Well, also when I went over the puzzle then again, and then I said, yeah, probably better not to publish it.
How do you come up with your puzzle names? I mean, most of them are Killer Sudoku X, but like, there's a couple of creative ones.
I tried to improve on that, because in the beginning I was okay, Killer Sudoku X number 2, Killer Sudoku X number 3. I just try to think of something that the clues in there remind me of, and then give it a name. Oh yeah, I just see that Satamath wrote that Mohos is my favorite Phistomefel puzzle name. I was also quite proud of that one. Actually, my wife gave me eventually the idea for this puzzle name.
Well, you just need to get more suggestions from your wife, I guess.
Probably.
Rapid fire questions. Answer one or the other. Do you prefer local or global deductions?
Hard one, global.
Coloring or good lifting?
Coloring.
Geometry or arithmetic?
Geometry.
Penpa or F puzzles?
F puzzles.
Sudoku or pencil puzzles?
I don't have to decide, do I?
Hybrid Sudoku?
Probably Sudoku.
Chaos or order?
Chaos.
Symmetric or anti-symmetric?
Symmetric.
Cages, lines, or dots?
Cages.
To disambiguate a puzzle, a given or a clue?
A clue, definitely.
Okay. I've noticed that there's sort of a stigma against givens in puzzles. Do you feel like you prescribe to this stigma?
This definitely applies to me. It is like, okay. I also used givens from time to time when I couldn't avoid them. For instance, non-consecutive Renban. So the non-consecutive condition, there you have a type symmetry, which also applies to the Renban. When you change a digit x for 10 minus x, you also get a valid solution, which means that you have to give a given or something else. And there I have to say I prefer a given digit over something like a greater sign. But there are definitely wonderful puzzles that have given digits, like from Tall Cat with the Renban lines and the tween lines.
Critical mass?
Critical mass, yeah. That, for instance. Wave particles, yeah, that could be from Totally Normal Cat.
I think a lot of Richard Stahl puzzles actually have givens in them, and they're all amazing.
So, but I think this might also be due to Richard being involved in constructing a lot of competition puzzles. So it is more important that people have a chance to solve it fast. So it is quite usual to give some digits.
Have you ever participated in studying for competition?
I did actually, yes. Actually, it was quite fun, because it was a different style of making Sudokus. So you have to take care of other things, that the difficulty isn't that hard, for instance, which was an interesting experience.
Do you often know what the difficulty of the puzzle is going to be before you finish making it? Or do you sort of test it afterwards and you're like, this is about 4 out of 5?
Often, no. I often don't know how difficult things are going to be. Apart from when I do puzzles on a smaller grid, then they tend to be 2 or 3 star puzzle. Apart from that, no, I don't know it.
For someone who has set as much as you you have almost 100 puzzles on LMD. Does the initial wonder that came with setting still exist for you? And if it's still there, how has it changed over time?
It is still there for me. It has become different. And there's actually, now I remember that there's a story about my first puzzle that I haven't told you beforehand, which added to me to this sense of wonder. I said that I do play chess, and I often had problems to visualize the chessboard and play the moves in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And when I set my first Sudoku, as I said it, I set it in one night, and I was really amazed when I noticed that on the next day I had the complete puzzle in my mind, and I could even recreate the solving path that I had in mind. And I mean, it's a 9x9 and a chessboard is 8x8, so that to me was very peculiar, and I was very happy about that. But it meant for me that I was a lot more involved in setting the Sudoku than I have ever been in playing chess. So this definitely added to the sense of wonder for me. Now, how has the sense of wonder changed over time? I don't recall any changes. There probably were, but I don't see them right now.
Do you find yourself setting in long chunks of contiguous time, or do you come at the problem bit by bit over a long period?
So my favorite type of setting is setting a puzzle in one night, which rarely works. So definitely in contiguous parts at the same time.
Do you consider yourself to have a unique setting style different from other people?
I don't have the feeling that my style is unique. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I don't think so, no.
Do you often interact with the LMD forum community? Like, are you active on posting and discussing theory and stuff, or is it sort of like just lurking about?
Yeah, I'm not very active there, discussing theory and stuff.
Do you often think about theory of puzzles or Sudoku while setting?
When I set puzzles, so especially pencil puzzle Sudoku hybrid, I am most interested. So these are the points where theory is especially interesting, I think, because it's not there yet. And what I try to do there is basically build a toolkit of deductions that you can do in that particular rule set. So apart from that, yes, I remember I tried to be active in finding new pieces of logic that haven't been found before and enlarging theory, but it didn't work out quite well for me. So I set 2 classic Sudokus where I thought, yes, this is something new, and it turned out, no, it wasn't.
If you were able to collaborate with any setter, regardless of whether they set now or in the past, who would you want to collaborate with on setting, or even just talk with for an afternoon?
I think I would say Mitchell Lee. So that would be really cool.
When looking for puzzles to solve, what factors stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm only a human being, so the rating is important for me, and also comments on Logic Masters Germany that say, I don't know, when there's not necessarily, this is the best puzzle that I have ever solved in my life. Of course, this also draws me to it, but also if there were some specific pieces of logic that were very nice and the rule set appeals to me, so that draws me to a puzzle.
What do you think of Schrödinger cell puzzles in Sudoku?
I really like the idea. It feels a bit pranking Simon for always making this joke about Schrödinger cells. There are some very nice Sudokus, but they are partially very, very hard. Yeah. So I haven't solved that many of them.
What puzzle/rule set did you find the most satisfying to get working?
I think this would be my wall Sudoku, where I took this consecutive constraint together with some cave-style clues. So what is special about this is one of the few times where I changed the rule set during the construction process. This puzzle was inspired by Cavern Crawl by Nordi, and then when I saw this particular puzzle, I had an idea of this wall Sudoku that I ended up setting, but with one more rule. So basically that you have to be able to reach every other point in the grid from every cell you start in. This adds some topological constraint, which is interesting, but I thought that I needed it for that. Actually, the interesting thing, I first sent another version of this puzzle to my tester, and they said, this is very nice. This is a very cool Sudoku up to a certain point where in the end I cannot figure out how to resolve this. And then it turned out that they hadn't used this particular rule for all of the time until the end. They just didn't remember it anymore. And then I thought, okay, now it might be better to remove that rule.
Was there any variants or rule sets that you combined or thought of yourself that you were like, I really hope other people make these things, and then they just they hadn't made anything with that? Like, is there something you would like to see more of?
Nothing that comes to mind immediately, and I have to say I love to be surprised, and I'm very happy, for instance, to see, I think KNT does a lot in this direction of cave puzzles in combination with Japanese sums, and two other types that I knew, but I forgot. It was also with Japanese sums, but I forgot the other variant, the other pencil puzzle. And this is something that I really like, and I hope I will have the time to check this.
You made a couple of them recently.
Yeah, I also have to say thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much to the chat. I read some comments in between when I wasn't talking. So thanks a lot. I enjoyed
pay
it.
attention to the chat, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to read it back as well. Yeah, thank you everyone. Subscribe if you enjoy this content.